Greetings. I'm Professor Jagdish Sheth at Emory University, and thank you for inviting me to the 13th Conference of Emerging Markets Consortium Board. I'm glad this is held in Delhi, and again, I thank IIM Lucknow for hosting it. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person. My presentation is about growing importance of India in the New World Order. India has become more and more strategic nation, especially in the last one decade, and it will talk about the old world order economically and how it is transitioning into the new world order, what are the reasons behind, and how India can take advantage of its rising importance in the world geopolitics, world economics, world politics, and world military. The old world order was basically controlled by 15 nations: North America, US and Canada, 12 common market Western European countries, no EU at that time, and of course a later entrant was Japan. 75% of all the GDP value add was generated by these 15 nations. 45% of the world trade was only among these nations. Why only 45? Because they still relied on their former colonies and other resource-rich nations for importing raw materials to do value add. However, all of them are aging and aging much more rapidly than they realized. So that's clearly the old world order as of 1987. What has changed the world order? There are about 5 different things that have happened since the late 80s. The first major has been the collapse of communism. Nobody expected Soviet Union to collapse as an economy, and suddenly it broke up into pieces. Many countries became independent, Eastern European countries, and Russia became Russia as a nation, wanting to become empire back again. So collapse of communism was a major event in world economics. Smartphones and social media, the start of the internet, for example, e-commerce. But the biggest change agent, I think, is the smartphones, which has a lot of capacity. They can do everything. And of course, now with the artificial intelligence coming in, it's all kinds of major technology innovations taking place in the digital space. Third one, as I mentioned before, rapid aging of the advanced nations, which is having its own consequences for domestic growth and all that. Next one is growing trade wars. We had the WTO in place, which was created to remove the general agreement of trade and tariffs. Unfortunately, we have now more and more protectionism, using tariffs as a mechanism to pay tax on an imported goods, etc. So growing trade wars is becoming a very key factor in the realignment of the world that's taking place. And number five, and the most important one, I think, as important as collapse of communism, is the rise of China. Out of nowhere, China has become the second largest economy and the manufacturing capital of the world. Very similar to the rise of Japan after World War II, essentially, or especially after the first energy crisis. In the 80s, we all talked about made in Japan as the dominant manufacturing nation. Today it is now China. So if you look at the economies of the world measured by purchasing power parity, IMF provides data annually. So the latest data is for 2023 based upon purchasing power parity based GDP. China is already number one, $35 trillion. US is number two with about $28 to $29 trillion. India is number three, 14.59 or about $15 trillion. And I believe India is slightly underrepresented because it has a much bigger cash economy compared to China and the United States. And you see a sudden drop afterwards. So purchasing power parity is a better measure to reflect GDP. It reflects the importance of large consumer markets, which is where India is becoming strategically important, not just as a market, but also as a sourcing destination. So India is likely to reposition on a two-dimensional map. So repositioning of India now is no longer a restricted domestic economy, but it is moving toward an integrated global economy. This is especially after the 1991 reforms, economic reforms that took place under the guidance of International Monetary Fund. We had the Prime Minister came in, Manmohan Singh, who was architect for reforming the economy. But it is also changing on the second side. It's getting much more integrated globally. Export imports are important. Foreign direct investment is important. Trade negotiations, bilateral agreements, you can think about all of them. But how do you get globally, economically integrated? But the second dimension is much more important. India is definitely going from a low-tech to a high-tech economy. Think about the digital revolution that has taken place in India, and now AI is likely to happen in India. We have Aadhaar platform. We have, of course, universal payment, UPI in place. There are many more public digital infrastructures which are coming in place, and I will talk about it a little more later on. Why is this possible now? India has several enviable ingredients, and now those ingredients are making possible the India's transformation, and India's Road to Transformation, which is a book I wrote, articulates about the changes taking place. First and most important is that India is a very big consumer market. In most consumer product categories, India is either number 1 or number 2, especially smartphones, cell phones, data, for example, just goes on and on. It is also a very big investment opportunity for defense and infrastructure investment. So the whole world will show up there to participate in the India's evolution toward defense, a major investment, but also infrastructure. Third and a very important one is digital talent. India is generating more software and hardware engineers. It needs to be absorbed in the economy, and it can happen when the world comes to discover India as a nation of talent, skills, etc. So digital talent is a third one. In fact, eventually I'll talk about how India is likely to become the service capital of the world, just like China has become the manufacturing capital of the world. Fourth ingredient is global diaspora. We have finally recognized the importance and the usefulness of global diaspora for the India's journey toward the 21st century, or toward 100 years anniversary in 2047. This global diaspora is not only just limited to the Gulf countries, but it is very important and powerful in America, US, Canada, British Commonwealth countries in general, including Australia, for example. The global diaspora is very important to leverage properly. Next one is growing soft power. The diplomatic engagements India's diplomats are making all over the world, with Prime Minister Modi leading the charge, having bilateral negotiations, both economically, militarily, and politically, is remarkable to see how India's image has changed in the world. It is no longer a country of roaming cows and snake charmers. It is a country of enormous wisdom, but more importantly, very talented diplomats. So our diplomatic soft power is increasing enormously. Strong military, which always people respect. And Indian military now is recognized as one of the best in the world, actually, both in naval exercises, definitely in the aviation area, and of course, foot soldiers. We have a strong presence in the army. And the last and the most important from my viewpoint is positive self-image. People of Indian origin all over the world, including in India, are taking a pride of who they are. Rather than having a helpless, defeatist attitude, it is an attitude of what I can do, everything is possible. I can get potential out of myself, pretty much. Self-positive image is very important. Same thing about the pro-India image that's arising all over the world. So how India can become strategic globally? Take this opportunity, and there is a 10-point recommendation. First and the most critical one for India to become strategically more important to the world is to embrace global standards and global benchmarks for all of its products, not just export, for domestic products and services, such as automobile components, pharmaceuticals, processed foods. It should be world standards, no such thing as an export quality and a domestic quality. Second, it should become a second global sourcing destination, what is commonly referred to as China Plus strategy. It cannot displace China, but it can de-risk the world from China. I think that's becoming a major initiative, and it can be a great opportunity for India to get globally integrated, plus move on from a low-tech to a high-tech. Become the service capital of the world, as I mentioned before. Examples are high-end services, where the hourly wages are $100 or more that you can command from the market. R&D services is clearly we have more scientists that can be utilized by the world. IT services, of course, is very well known. It has crossed $150 to $200 billion now, out of nowhere. Accounting and legal services are growing out of India. But most important one is for India to invest in skill development. In fact, I have a forthcoming book on this area about the whole area of how skill development or vocational education and training transforms the nations. Historically, we have done research on about 20 countries and learned some lessons that can be very valuable. Investment in skill development is a very key foundation to become the service capital or even a manufacturing capital of the world. Gain soft power by developing globally admired brands. Countries get respect and admiration not just by their ancient wisdom alone or by their political leaders, but by their brand names. I saw that happen with Japan in the 50s, with South Korea in the 70s, with China in the 80s and the 90s. India needs to create world-class brands which are admired worldwide. We do have business groups which are highly respected, such as the Tata Group, the Reliance Group, the Birla Groups, but it's more than that. It is the product quality. They are world admired to say this is the best in class, made in India, taking a pride in that one. But as I said, the most important ingredient to do is invest in vocational education training. Number 5, invest in digital public infrastructure. I think private sector is not able to come out with massive investment in the digital platforms. Only the state enterprises or government can do it. And we have shown this. Aadhaar is a classic example. And as I mentioned, UPI is a more recent example. But India can lead the world because of its talent in the artificial intelligence world or any other kind of a technological evolution, not just digital technology, but biological sciences also. Number 6, welcome foreign direct investment in India for world markets, not just for the Indian market or the regional market, but make just like China. Make in China is done because the foreign companies wanting to manufacture in China for its labor, for its infrastructure, whatever reason is. Most of the brands are foreign brands made in China. Chinese brands are just rising right now. So I think the point here is that we need to attract companies in India for the next generation of technologies, for automobile, which is a very key sector, appliances, a very big one again, aerospace, and defense services. These are just a few examples. Provide huge economic incentives for innovation and entrepreneurship in agriculture. 3 sectors are very key to uplift the people from a low-tech to high-tech through innovation and entrepreneurship, that is in agriculture, education, and healthcare. Some of them are so fundamental, universal in nature, that if you bring about a change in the human potential through education and human health through healthcare investment, the nation rises. Examples are USDA in agriculture in the US, CDC in healthcare or public health, and NIH in health sciences in general. But also similarly, one has to invest in educations like the land-grant universities in America, or in fact, technological universities, medical universities. I think we just need a more size and a scale than what we have been able to do so far. Point number 8, digitize, digitize, digitize. Especially the government bureaus, government activities. As people say, data is the new oil or new energy, new whatever it is. Greater transparency it provides, and accountability also it provides. Data are stored forever. So anytime one has to have any problems, one can go back to the data, and it enhances human capital. Digital world actually is making the life better. In fact, it should be used very heavily where we spent enormous human labor, which is agriculture, for example, more so than even in education. So how can we digitize the world of agriculture, education, and health sciences, which are the 3 foundational areas besides manufacturing? Number 9, mandate management education for diplomats, military personnel, and state enterprises. They have their own colleges, but there is no management focus. It's ironic that management comes, especially operations research, from the military, but nowadays it is not used as much as the business schools use. So one can reposition the existing training colleges in each one of those sectors by having management curriculum, or send them to management institutes such as the IIMs of the world, or whatever the private sector colleges and institutes are out there. Number 10, deepen diplomatic relationship with G20 nations, both professionally and personally. Relationships are not just professional, but they transcend into personal relationship, personal friendships. And I must tell you, Prime Minister Modi is just marvelous at that. Think about it. He can relate very well to Putin on the one hand, to Zelensky in Ukraine on the other hand, to, of course, the UK Prime Minister, no matter what generation they come in, to the French Macron, in America from Obama to Biden to Trump. It's incredible to see how all the world leaders really admire and respect him, because he knows how to do diplomatic relationship but also personal friendships. Personal friendships matter in the diplomatic world or in the leadership world, and it's remarkable to see how popular he is outside of India. And of course, there's a whole initiative. India is leading the charge toward global south, and energy is one of them, but there are many sectors where India is likely to be the lead nation toward a consortium of about 100 countries. So let me conclude. There is a new geopolitical order, especially after the collapse of communism, rise of digital technology, and of course, the rise of China. The traditional leaders and institutions are struggling to maintain world order. Populism is everywhere. Incumbents are not re-elected. Incumbent parties fail. Worldwide is a movement, it looks like. So there's a huge churn or turmoil. During this turmoil, India is likely to become a dominant voice, a dominant in the center rather than on the periphery of the world economy and world politics. This has generated opportunity for new leadership, as we have seen worldwide. India is destined to become strategic globally. India has the enviable ingredients, as I mentioned, but needs a recipe to take advantage of the new world order. Repositioning India from a restricted domestic economy to a globally integrated economy, and more importantly or equally important, from a low-tech nation to a high-tech nation. It's very important to have the daily wages rise by making them more skilled labor as opposed to unskilled, and converting unbranded consumption to branded consumption, unorganized sector to organized sector. All of that requires technology going from low-tech to high-tech. Today's automobile really is a computer. You cannot do fixing without having a PC or a laptop. In my generation, it was basically oil change. Cars, they were more mechanical, maybe electromechanical. Today it's mostly electronics. They're basically moving cell phones. large-scale mobile phones in many ways. Tesla is a classic example. So low-tech to high-tech is very important, whatever it takes, both by the private sector and by the government or the public sector. The 10-point recommendations will ensure India's strategic place in the new world order. Thank you very much, and again I apologize I cannot be there in person. Thank you.